Lesson 4. Working with radicals. In order to achieve an exact answer, an answer must be left in radical form. As a result, an important math skill is knowing how to work with radicals. One important skill is knowing how to place a radical in its simplest form. This involves expressing the radical as a product of two radicals and then expressing the perfect square radical as a whole number. So in order to put a radical in simplest form, we express it as a product of two radicals, with one being a perfect square radical. And then we simplify the perfect square radical into a whole number. Let's look at an example. Root 50. We simplify this and by first writing this as a product of two whole numbers. The number under the radical sign. And we pick the perfect square radical. The largest perfect square radical. We always pick the largest perfect square radical as a factor. So the largest perfect square radical of 50 is 25, because the root of 25 is 5. So we simplify. 50 equals 25 times 2. Then we take the root of each of them and we multiply. When you have a multiplication under the radical sign, you can apply the radical sign to each term. Then you take the root of 25, and that's 5. So you get 5 root 2. As a result, 5 root 2 is the simplified form of root 50. Remember to make sure one of the radicals is the greatest perfect square that is a factor of the original radicand. So you have to make sure that the perfect square radical that you're taking that is a factor of the original radicand is the largest perfect square radical. So you always have to make sure that it is the greatest perfect square. Adding or subtracting radicals is the same as adding or subtracting polynomials. You can only add or subtract like radicals. So like radicals are the only ones you can add or subtract. Like radicals are radicals with the same radicand under the root symbols, such as root 7 and 5 root 7. So like radicals are the ones with the same radicand under the root symbols. So these are like radicals because they both have 7 under the root symbol. Simply add or subtract the whole number in front of the radicand. In front of the radical. So simply add 1 root 7 plus 5 root 7 equals 1 plus 5, 6 root 7. You may need to simplify both radicals if they are not fully simplified. Remember, always work with simplified radicals. Let's look at an example where simplification is necessary. Five root 8 plus 3 root 18. Remember to simplify both radicals first. So these radicals are not simplified. We can tell because their perfect square radical, there's a factor of this 8 that's a perfect square radical, and there's a factor of this square that's a perfect, of this number that's a perfect square radical. We have to take the perfect square radical that is the largest perfect square radical that is a factor. So we take root 4. 4 is the largest perfect square radical that is a factor of the original number. Once we take 4 and 9, we simplify. Root of 4 is 2, root of 9 is 3. Then we simplify again furthermore. We multiply the numbers with the numbers and then numbers under the radical sign with the numbers under the radical sign. 5 times root 2 is 10. 3 times 3 is 9. Then we simplify further. We can add these because these are like terms. You will learn multiplication of radicals in the next step here. And when multiplying radicals, you multiply the whole numbers with the whole numbers, and the number under the radical sign with the number under the radical sign, if that is the case. 5 times 2 is 10. 3 times 3 is 9. We add these because these are like radicals. 10 plus 9 is 19. 19 root 2. Multiplying radicals is also similar to multiplying polynomials. All terms are multiplied. Whole numbers are multiplied with whole numbers, and numbers under the radical sign are multiplied with numbers under the radical sign. So we just went over that. Multiplication properties for more complicated multiplications, such as distributive properties, still hold true. With multiplication, you may have to simplify your final answer. Let's look at an example. So we can still use distributive property. It still holds true. And all other multiplication properties still hold true. And we may have to simplify our final answer. Let's look at an example. 2 root 3 times 4 plus 5 root 3. This is a multiplication and an addition. So we have to use the distributive property in this case. Because a times b plus c equals ab plus ac. So we multiply 2 root 3 times 4 and 2 root 3 times 5 root 3. And now we just multiply whole numbers with whole numbers, numbers under the radical sign with numbers under the radical sign. 2 times 4 is 8, 8 root 3. 5 times 2 is 10, 3 times 3 is 9. Now we take the square root of the 9, because that's a perfect square radical. And that's 3. Then we further simplify. 10 times 3 is 30. And we can't simplify this any further because there's no factor of 3 that is a perfect square radical. So 8 root 3 plus 30 is in fully simplified form. Note that coefficients are multiplied with coefficients and radicals are multiplied with radicals. Afterwards, it is often possible to simplify your answer. The answer you will get when working with radicals are exact. Unlike rounded decimals, they are not approximations. Don't round your final answer into a decimal unless the question asks you to. And that's all for lesson 4, working with radicals. Stay tuned for next lesson, lesson 5, solving quadratic equations. Like and subscribe. Also, click on the video on the screen if you want to see the next lesson, or click on the other playlist on the screen to see all the videos in this course. Thank you.